Some stories break you, some heal you. But here at my 90s love story, we're here to fill your heart. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. 6 years after we broke up, I stood naked in front of the glass wall on the 99th floor of a hotel, while Sebastian let the wine slide off his own body and drip down onto my skin, one slow drop at a time. He looked at me with an easy smile, faintly bored. "You'd think a big CEO like me should show a little sincerity, wouldn't you?" he said. Ex-girlfriend. The rainy season dragged on, and it left the air damp and hot at the same time. Unbearable. I was standing in the little tea room tearing open a packet of instant coffee, listening to a few coworkers gossiping in the room next door. "This rain's been going for almost 2 weeks now, hasn't it?" Diane said. "No sun at all. Everything in the house is going moldy." Then, as if she'd suddenly remembered something, she turned and looked at me. "Nadia, are you coming to the party tonight? I heard Sebastian Wilder's going to be there. You're a fan of his, right?" "She even uses a picture of him as her phone wallpaper," Kayla said. I smiled lightly. "It's just a coincidence. I'm a grown woman. What's shameful about having someone you look up to?" I only smiled and didn't argue. With Diane, even if I pushed back, she could rattle off 10 reasons to push right back at me. I turned to leave the tea room, and Kayla called after me. "Hey, Nadia, your coffee. You forgot it." I turned around and saw the cup left sitting on the water dispenser, the brown liquid already brimming over and running down the sides. "Sorry, I forgot," I said, hurrying over to shut off the water, pulling a few tissues to clean up the mess before pouring out the overflowing cup and going back to my desk. Kayla trailed after me and leaned in. "What's the matter with you? You look like your head's 1,000 miles away." "I'm fine," I said, giving her my usual gentle smile, trying to brush it off. But she wouldn't let it go. "Fine? Look at your hands, they're shaking." The truth is, in all those years, it wasn't as if I'd never run into Sebastian again. He was simply too famous. His name was everywhere, on the billboards along the main streets, in the trending searches, on the giant posters outside the movie theaters. After he rose to fame at that astonishing speed, my ordinary days couldn't really avoid his presence, and it didn't help that we both worked in media. The dinner party that night was only a half-formal gathering. When Sebastian walked in, everyone immediately clustered around him with polite greetings. From head to toe, he radiated the sheen of expensive things. As he talked, he would occasionally narrow his eyes, the corner of his mouth curving up, one hand idly turning the ring on his finger. When someone said something a little out of line, he wouldn't even react, but they would panic and apologize at once, as if ready to drop to their knees to make up for it. I stood in a shadowed corner behind a curtain, calmly watching the scene in front of me. Kayla, a glass of wine in her hand, stood beside me and sighed. "Doesn't it disappoint you seeing this? These celebrities are all the same. All that polite, gracious behavior is an act for the fans. Underneath, their tempers are worse than anyone's." "I know," I said. In fact, I'd known for a long time. His temper had never been a good one. The year I turned 17, he and I left our hometown together to busk on the streets of a provincial city. We had an old guitar that had passed through more owners than I could count, and a speaker so bad it was hard to bear. We sang from morning to night and earned almost nothing. Still, that performing caught the attention of a local band. Back then, everyone was poor, and getting paid to play on the street was a luxury. We were both scraping to stay alive. That day, after we'd finished, I was gathering the messy handful of loose change from the ragged guitar case, getting ready to go, when the light around us suddenly went dark. A group of big men had us cornered. They grabbed the money and told us to get lost. Sebastian didn't answer and didn't argue. He just stared at them in silence until they burst out laughing. "Singing this trashy stuff? You might as well tell her to take her skirt off and dance. That'd be quicker. If she needs it, we'll do her the favor." They doubled over laughing. And Sebastian laughed too. He laughed, turning the cheap ring I'd given him around on his finger. Then he clenched his fist and drove a punch straight into one of their faces. Tonight, almost every reporter in the room was hoping for some favor from Sebastian. All it took was for him to choose you, and you became the luckiest person there. Kayla obviously understood this, so she screwed up her courage and spoke to him. "Mr. Wilder, we're from Spring Magazine. We were hoping we might be able to do an exclusive interview with you." His gaze was like dim moonlight over frost. It didn't linger on Kayla for long. It slid past her and came to rest on my face. "And you?" It was a strange question. Even though Kayla and I were clearly standing together, his eyes stayed locked on me, as if he meant to pull an answer out of my mouth. I let out a quiet breath. "It's me, Mr. Wilder. I was hoping for a chance at an interview, too. I hope you'll consider our magazine." And then, all at once, he laughed. His face was so exquisite you couldn't tell if it was a man's or a woman's, but his eyes were as sharp as a blade just drawn from its sheath. That dazzling smile left people stunned. It was so blindingly beautiful. All around us, the cameras began flashing, but he signaled his assistant and his security to hold them back. "Fine, I'll take any reporter, but not you two." His eyes still hadn't left me, and there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "Because looking at your face makes me feel sick." "What am I supposed to do, Miss Reporter?" I stood frozen, my face pale, unable to say a word. That seemed to satisfy Sebastian. He curved his lips into a pleased little smirk, then led the people around him off somewhere else. The bright light in the room seemed to drain away with his footsteps. I stayed where I was, sunk in the dim shadow, vaguely remembering the past. Many years ago, when we were both 18, when we first came to a big city, we rented the shabbiest place in a slum on the edge of town. That winter was cold enough to cut through skin. I'd showered in a makeshift bathroom and come out with my wet hair frozen stiff, and I deliberately pressed my ice-cold hands against his neck to warm them. Sebastian didn't get angry. He just set down the guitar, turned, took hold of my collar, and kissed me hard, my dripping hair sending cold drops down onto his cheek and chest, like beads of sweat, or like tears about to fall. Back then, Sebastian was already beautiful, even more beautiful than he is now, with a wild, reckless kind of beauty that pulled you in. In his eyes, I could see the reflection of myself, an ordinary girl with nothing remarkable about her. I couldn't help but say it. "Do you think I'm not pretty enough?" "Are you joking?" He smiled and bit my lip, a little too hard, holding me in that hot embrace. He whispered against my ear, his voice low and warm. "Look at you, and you still think I'd find you not pretty enough? My girlfriend has to be the most beautiful woman in the world, of course." When the party ended, Kayla was still standing by the window. I walked over and called her name. She turned to look at me, her eyes full of resentment she couldn't hide. It was easy to understand. A star adored by tens of thousands had personally stepped aside for us, and then flatly said he'd never let us have an interview. To fall from heaven straight into hell. Maybe it felt something like that. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but in the end, she only let out one bitter line. "Did you offend Sebastian Wilder somehow, before?" I didn't know how to answer. I was silent for a long time before I said, "You could say that." "An ex-fan who got caught asking things she shouldn't have? Or someone who saw him out with a date?" She fired off a whole string of guesses, then finished with, "Whatever the reason, this has to be dealt with, doesn't it? If the boss finds out about tonight, our whole team's going to be optimized out of a job next month. Honestly, what did you do? Why didn't you say something first? At least so I could have braced myself. I actually thought we had a real shot at interviewing him." I looked down at the wine stain on the floor, my eyes lowered. Don't worry, I'll think of a way to handle it. A while later, everyone had gone. Sebastian, with a status like his, certainly wouldn't linger to the end of a party. He'd left early. I walked out of the building into the hot, humid night. In a place where only wealthy people came and went, you couldn't even find a public bike to rent. The sky spat out a few drops of rain and then quickly stopped. As I turned down a small road at an intersection, there was a black car parked there. Just as I passed it, the door suddenly opened. There was no light inside. I couldn't make out anything. But a cold, hoarse voice came out of the dark, unmistakable. "Get in." Inside the car, a faint fragrance mingled with the smell of wine into something hazy. I sat hunched, my hands set neatly on my knees, not daring to move. "Mr. Wilder, were you planning to walk home?" Sebastian lazily lit a cigarette in the dark, and the glow at the tip of it became the only source of light. "Not really. I was going to find a public bike and take the subway, but I couldn't find one." He didn't answer. His eyes just grazed over me. His assistant spoke up instead. "It's late now. The last train has probably stopped running." Before I could reply, Sebastian spoke again. "Back then, when I was locked up and hadn't gotten out yet, you were in such a hurry to leave me, all for a better life. You even said you'd do just fine without me. But look at what you've become after all these years. You're almost 30 now, aren't you?" The light in the car finally came on. In the dim glow, the distance between us was so close that I could see clearly the emotion churning in his eyes, like a rising tide. It surged forward, as if to drown me in mockery and contempt. I suddenly felt helpless, unable to argue back. All I could do was sigh. "You're right. I don't have what it takes to disappoint you. I'm sorry." "That won't fix anything, Ibi." He raised an eyebrow. "Watching you live like this, I just want to say it's a good thing." A person who had come through 6 years of storms could put on a perfect performance for other people. But in front of me, he didn't seem to bother keeping up any kind of shell at all. I was quiet for a while, watching the car pull into the parking area of a nearby 5-star hotel. Sebastian stubbed out his cigarette and signaled his assistant to open the door, then leaned against it and looked at me, his gaze taunting. "Or do you plan on sleeping in the car tonight?" In the elevator, the light was so bright it was uncomfortable. The ride was very smooth. I stood in the corner, keeping 2 steps of distance from Sebastian. Neither of us seemed to have any intention of moving closer. I looked down, and without meaning to, I remembered many years ago, when we first came to the big city, our first time riding an elevator. It was an old thing that shook violently every time it moved, packed with people, the smell of cigarettes and sweat mixing until I nearly fainted from the nausea. Luckily, Sebastian had gripped my hand tight and leaned close to my ear, whispering, his voice light as a feather. "Feeling dizzy? Hold on, let me kiss you and it'll pass." Whenever I remembered those old days, I couldn't stop myself from drifting off. My unfocused eyes stared into the mirror in front of me, which reflected Sebastian's image. He was dressed immaculately, a jewel-set ring on his finger. In the mirror, his eyes met mine, and he smiled faintly. "Still standing there? Do I have to invite you out?" So many years had passed since then. This was reality. We had always lived in reality. I pulled myself together and followed Sebastian out of the elevator, down a hallway laid with a thick red carpet. At the end of it, a door opened onto a presidential suite so lavish it bordered on absurd. The panoramic glass wall, wiped spotless, gave a full view of the city at night. He opened the wine cabinet, poured himself a glass of red, then turned and saw me spaced out again. "What are you thinking about now?" I was thinking that this must be the world you see now. Everything so high up, so far away. When we were 17, we'd sat on a smoke-belching rickshaw, dodging fares, then squeezed onto a reeking intercounty bus that smelled of gasoline, and after half a day, We'd finally left our hometown. We walked the red brick roads of the city, tall buildings on every side cutting off our view, nothing to see but crowds rushing past us like a swift river. The place felt so enormous that it seemed no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure all of it with my own 2 feet in a lifetime. I don't want to think about it anymore. It's nothing. I drew a deep breath and forced my voice to stay calm and sincere. Mr. Wilder, everything that happened before was my fault. I'm sorry. If there's anything you need me to do to make up for it, I'll do it. But please, give our magazine a chance. Life is hard right now. My coworkers all just want to keep their jobs. I'd repeated these words so many times in my head that now they poured out of me smoothly. Sebastian leaned back against the bar and looked at me, smiling without any reaction at all. Only at the end did he raise an eyebrow very slightly. You think a man like me ought to show a little sincerity, don't you? Ex-girlfriend. He held his glass, his gaze relaxed, his smile leisurely. Take it off. The light in the room was like a thin veil drawn over everything, hazy and heavy with meaning. I stared into his malicious eyes, and it took me a few seconds to realize that this was simply a continuation of the humiliation from before. In his eyes, none of it was over yet, but he had truly overestimated me. In the 6 years since we broke up, he had climbed to a peak I would never reach, while I was still floundering in the mud, tearing away my own dignity over and over, like peeling off layer after layer of skin. The dress on my body now was nothing more than a scrap of cloth. I stood inside his gaze and reached for the zipper. In a few motions I had it off, and the cheap chiffon dress slipped softly to the floor. I looked straight at him. Like this? Is this enough? The contempt in his eyes vanished all at once, replaced by a deep, aching hatred, like a raw wound of blood surfacing on his face. He was still fully, neatly dressed, and I was completely bare. We stood facing each other under the extravagant light of that room. A very, very long time ago, under the dim light of a small rented room, we had once stood like this too. His ears and neck had flushed red, and he'd trembled, but he tried to keep his composure as he looked at me. I took you out of that place so that you could end up like this? I know, I'd said, rising on my toes to lift his face and kiss him. But last night I dreamed of you. The memory pulled me back to the present. Sebastian finally set his glass down and walked toward me. The distance was so short that in a few steps he was right in front of me. He lowered his head, his lips only inches from mine, his breath thick with wine, as if he meant to swallow up the space between us. Nadia, he said, you really have no shame at all. As soon as the words were out, he stepped back, as though he'd touched something filthy, and looked at the softness at my waist. Do you have any idea who wants to be with me now? You think my taste is as bad as it was 10 years ago? You're almost 30. We had known each other for nearly 3 decades. He always knew exactly where to press to hurt me the most. I closed my eyes, my eyelids trembling hard, feeling as though the lights would burn my eyes until they bled. In that moment, I truly hoped this was only a nightmare, that everything happening was just an illusion, and that when I opened my eyes, it would all rewind to that little rented room on the edge of town. But when I opened my eyes, I was still in reality. Just then, Sebastian took a long stride forward, gripped my chin, and pressed his mouth to mine. The kiss was like the strike of a wild animal. His teeth bit down on my chapped lips until they split and bled, and he swallowed the blood down. It felt as if my body were being torn in two by a sharp blade. The faint sparks of pleasure were quickly drowned out by the fierce pain. Does it hurt? He tightened his hand around my throat and looked down at me from above. Nadia, things like this aren't supposed to hurt this much. The blood rushed to my eyes, and everything in front of me blurred. I opened my mouth, but no sound would come out. In the hazy border between reality and illusion, I suddenly remembered being 17, on that jolting old rickshaw as it rattled down the village road. I'd sat beside Sebastian on the pile of straw, his hand holding mine, both our palms damp with cold sweat from nerves. I saw a sparrow rise into the sky, and then, an instant later, a slingshot pellet struck it, and it dropped to the ground. I never did know whether I'd truly gotten out, or whether I was still trapped in that same loop forever. Sebastian agreed to give our magazine an exclusive interview. Spring Magazine had always been a small outfit, dead last in the whole industry. Kayla couldn't believe that after that one night, everything had turned around so suddenly. During lunch, she pulled me aside and peppered me with questions. "What on earth did you do? That was Sebastian Wilder. Last night, from the sound of his voice, I thought he wanted to swallow you whole." I scooped a spoonful of steamed egg into my mouth and smiled faintly. "I just apologized to him, that's all." "Really? A verbal apology was enough?" She scratched her chin, baffled. "From the way he acted yesterday, I really thought he was as impossible to reach as the rumors say." I smiled the way I always did and said nothing more, just focused on my bowl of steamed egg. Many years ago, I got hurt during a performance. Sebastian went hungry, took all the little money we had, bought 2 eggs, and came home and steamed them for me. When I tried to give him half of mine, he pushed it firmly back. "You eat it," he said. "Steamed egg is good for wounds. Finish all of it. Don't waste any." It was rare to see him so serious. He watched me the whole time, spoon by spoon, until I'd eaten every bit, even scraping the bottom of the bowl before he 500 let it go. Now the one who was hurt had become him. The interview was set for 3 days later. The company took the chance very seriously and prepared everything down to the last detail. The whole thing went astonishingly smoothly. During the open questions at the end, Kayla couldn't help herself. "Mr. Wilder, what made you change your mind overnight and agree to us?" I was sorting materials beside them, and when I heard the question, I went still at once. Sebastian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes as he looked at her. "What did Miss Ramsey tell you about me?" "She said she apologized to you very sincerely, and you forgave her," Kayla said. Sunlight poured into the room through the glass window. I looked straight at Sebastian. In front of him, he curled his lips slightly, his voice cold but pleasant as it slid from his throat. "She knelt down in front of me like a dog begging me to let her off. Said she'd do anything. She practically put a chain around her own neck. It seemed sincere enough. If I hadn't forgiven her, wouldn't that have made me too cruel?" The room went instantly, suffocatingly silent. No one dared to say a word. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, full of complicated feelings, like needles pricking into my skin, until I was nearly drowned in an unbearable shame. I placed my hands flat on the table to keep myself steady, my knuckles white from the force. Sebastian sat there, still smiling calmly. "Of course, none of that needs to go in the article, does it?" "Oh, yes, that's a private matter between you and Nadia." "We won't write it in," Diane said quickly, her voice flustered. "Any video or audio, we'll delete it all the moment we get back." Sebastian didn't answer. He only folded his hands together and rested them under his chin, smiling coolly. "Let's end things here for today." His assistant stood and politely showed everyone out. Everyone understood without being told, and no one mentioned that I was still sitting there. In the end, only Sebastian and I were left in the room. He didn't move from his seat, only flicked his eyes at me. "What is it? You hate me that much?" I let out a long breath and tried to stay calm. "Isn't it over yet? What exactly do you want from me, Sebastian?" "How much do you think you're worth? Sleeping with me one time in exchange for an interview? You think that's a fair trade? He sneered. Don't think so highly of yourself. Either you quit this job and stay by my side, and I order you around however I please. I didn't answer and didn't look at him. I only stared at the surface of the table, where sunlight caught the dust hanging in the air, dancing in the light. He understood me too well. I couldn't even be like the heroines of those cheap stories, going on about being independent and strong or chasing a dream. Because the truth was, I was doing a job I didn't even love, and he could see it plainly. He could see how I had groveled and crawled through a miserable life. You weren't good enough before, he said lazily. Now I can easily give you things you could never earn in a whole lifetime, Nadia. Let's settle everything today. I don't have the patience to wait until tomorrow. I went back to the office, handed in my resignation, and turned over my work. The whole process went strangely smoothly. No one made it difficult for me. Only my coworkers' eyes fell on my back as I left, as if they could burn straight through the clothes I was wearing. Who knew Nadia had it in her? Just before the door closed, I heard someone say, though I couldn't tell who, being beautiful really is an advantage. No wonder she has it so much easier than the rest of us. For a few days after I quit, Sebastian gave me nothing to do. It wasn't until a week later that he called me. I'll have my assistant come pick you up. The house he lived in was luxurious beyond imagining. It even had a wall of clear glass displaying every kind of instrument, and among them was a guitar said to have been handmade by a legendary craftsman, worth tens of millions. He'd used that guitar last year at a concert packed with 100,000 people. I looked up at its glossy surface, but in my heart I remembered the old guitar we used to have, the one we'd played on the street, passed down through so many owners that no matter how you tuned it, the sound was never quite right. Sebastian had simply adjusted himself to it. Later, when we'd finally saved enough to buy a new one, he still often played off the beat. Late that night, Sebastian finally came home. He smelled of wine and perfume mixed together, and there were faint lipstick marks on his shirt collar. He seemed to be in a foul mood. He walked past me, pulling off his tie as he went, then grabbed my wrist. You really do know how to obey now, don't you? He shoved me down onto the sofa and pinned me there. The pain made me tremble like a fish on a cutting board, its scales stripped away, blood running. Pressed down beneath him, the sweet perfume coming off his skin made me want to be sick. Then my cheek burned. Sebastian had slapped me. He gripped my chin, bent down, and bit my lip. The thing that disgusts me most is you, Nadia. You used to say you'd love me forever, and yet the moment a richer man came along, you dropped me without a thought. What right do you have to look sick to your stomach in front of me? Forever together. Forever. Those words were like a red-hot iron that made me curl in on myself. But Sebastian still forced me down flat, the way you'd smooth out a rug. In the chaos of my memory, scattered images flickered past like a film on fast forward. The first time we performed on the street and got a 50 yuan note from a passerby, Sebastian was so happy he took me straight into a supermarket to pick out the snacks and fruit I liked. There were 2 bright red apples, glossy, sealed in plastic film, labeled as imported from New Zealand. It wasn't until we went to pay that we found out the 50 was counterfeit. We couldn't buy anything, so we had to put it all back. The cashier watched us warily and followed close at our backs as if afraid we'd steal something. On the way home, in the night wind, neither of us said a word, but we still held hands. I asked him, "Where's New Zealand? Is it very far?" He answered, "However far it is, one day we'll go there together." Later, as the internet started to take off, there were people who became famous overnight. With the savings from selling our songs and taking odd jobs all over, we finally managed to put a little aside. We moved from sleeping on wooden boards in a warehouse to a small room on the outskirts of the city. Under the flickering light of a filament bulb, Sebastian would sit hunched over, writing music. He'd write a few lines, then pick up the guitar and try it out. And whenever something wasn't right, he'd bend back down to fix it. I cut up a discounted watermelon I'd bought into little pieces and fed them to him. He bit into one and said, "It's good. I want to eat the whole thing." So I fed it to him, piece by piece. But the melon had gone bad, and he threw up all night, his face as pale as paper. Even so, he held my hand tight and wouldn't let me go downstairs to buy medicine. "It's fine, it's not your fault," he said. "I just don't want you blaming yourself, feeling like you wasted money on something spoiled. It's okay, really." Time kept moving forward and forward. In our early 20s, we put together a small band and picked up a modest handful of fans. He grew more and more beautiful, the kind of radiant beauty that, when he stepped on stage and the lights hit him, made the whole audience hold its breath. Once, a fan came to find him after a show to confess her feelings. He pulled his cap low and smiled softly. "I'm sorry, I can't accept. I love my girlfriend. We're going to be together our whole lives and never be apart." I dimly closed my eyes, and it felt as if everything in front of me had turned to specks of white, like the static on an old screen. Through that haze, I seemed to see Sebastian's face rise up, unclear and yet impossible to erase. The image of Sebastian in front of me began to overlap with the shape of him 6 years ago. In the detention center, through the clear pane of glass, I kept my face empty of feeling and spoke the words I'd rehearsed hundreds of times. "He proposed to me. He isn't like you. He has a stable job, a good income, a perfect and whole family. I know how badly you want to be famous, and I know you've always worked at it. But after all these years, how much longer are you going to run from the truth that everything you write is garbage? Look at you now, hurt all over, and you don't even know how many years they'll sentence you to. You still want to drag me down with you? Let me be honest. Back then I only followed you because you were the only one who wanted to take me out of that place. But I've been by your side for years now. I think I've paid off my debt. From now on, we go our separate ways. Let's not have anything to do with each other again." He stayed silent, sitting there across from me, his face covered in bruises that somehow made his eyes look like shattered stars. I knew Sebastian wouldn't easily believe these words. I understood him, just as he understood me. So, after a brief pause, I gave a cold, faint smile and said the last thing. "If you keep bothering me, I won't hesitate to tell people what happened at the river that year. You know it can't end well, Sebastian. We should end this cleanly." That last sentence took me 55 seconds to say. In all the years afterward, I always remembered every second of it clearly. The smile on my lips was like a mask hanging in the air, while inside, my real feelings had been torn to raw, bleeding shreds. I spoke very slowly, because I couldn't make myself go faster. Every word that left my mouth was like a hammer driving a nail into my temple, the pain so sharp that I couldn't fully open my eyes. Through the glass, I saw every change on Sebastian's face. The smile faded from his lips, the light in his eyes went out, and the man in front of me seemed to turn into a planet caving in on itself. When I finished the last word, I braced my hands on the table, stood, turned, and walked out of the room. Before I left, he called my name. "Nadia." That was the last day we saw each other. The cold light of the detention center fell on my face, and yet it burned like the sunset over the riverbank that day. That day, to save me, Sebastian had, without meaning to, pushed my father, a drunk and a gambler, into the rushing water. I lay collapsed on the ground, my clothes in disarray. gasping for breath, and slowly sat up in the red glow of the sunset. He called my name. Nadia, let me take you out of here. Let me take you out of here. The memory wrapped around me like threads and pulled me back into the present. In the middle of that agony, I slowly reached out, little by little, and put my arms around his neck. His rough, almost punishing movements suddenly stopped. I didn't look at his face. I only heard my own voice, as if it were echoing from the far side of a river, low and weak. Let's end this. From that day on, I moved into Sebastian's house. Beyond the intimacy that was a kind of torture, he often took me along with him and made me do the work of a personal assistant. But I soon realized he didn't actually need one. What he said was just another way to torment me. Nadia, Miss Sloane said she wanted an Americano. Who told you to buy a white mocha? In a corner of the film set, he sat beside the actress, Miss Sloane, and lifted his brows, scolding me gently. Almost 30, and you can't even get a small thing like this right. No wonder you've never been anything but a failure. The actress, who looked barely 20, tugged lightly at his sleeve and smiled sweetly. It's all right, it's all right. A white mocha's fine. I'll drink it. I stood there frozen, not moving. The words he'd been about to say seemed to catch on his lips and stall for a moment. The memories from before, blurred as they were, still ran deep in him. But now all of those memories were nothing but fuel to feed his hatred for me. I closed my eyes, bowed my head, apologized, and went back out to buy the coffee again. By the time I came back, it had suddenly started pouring. With 2 bags of coffee in my arms, I couldn't hold an umbrella, and the cups were soaked through with rain. Sebastian glanced at them once and gave a cold order. Buy them again. Everyone on set could see that he was deliberately making things hard for me. They whispered behind my back. I wonder what she did to offend Mr. Wilder. Maybe back before he was famous, she flattered someone else and walked all over him. She's not young anymore either. Living like this, she really has it coming. I stood in the restroom and calmly listened to them talk until they were done. I waited until it was completely quiet outside, until I was sure no one was left, before I opened the door and came out. The mirror reflected my image back at me, my hair matted with sweat and clinging to my face, a face that had always been plain and had only grown uglier as time wore its marks into it. Looking at myself in the glass, next to the Sebastian of today, we might as well have belonged to 2 different worlds. People would sooner believe that he and I were enemies than believe we had once loved each other. That was fine too. I splashed water on my face and left the restroom. Outside, everyone was holding a wrap party for the film, chattering about the dinner that night. I followed along after Sebastian. With his standing now, even the director politely invited him to the seat of honor. He didn't refuse. He picked up the menu and looked it over, chatting easily about the differences between shrimp farming regions and the marbling grades of beef and other complicated terms I didn't understand at all. In that moment, I felt his world was too far from mine. Maybe it was because I was too tired, or maybe for some other reason, but I started to feel dizzy. And in my eyes, memory and reality tangled together again. A blur. Many years earlier, when we were still living on the edge of the city, for a short while, a boxed rice shop opened up nearby. The owner was a kind, generous woman, and her food was cheap and good, with free pickled greens on the side. If you couldn't afford a full portion, you could just spend a few cents on a box of plain rice and pile on lots of pickled greens to go with it. The owner knew we were young, so she'd scoop the rice full. One portion could last us all day, and at the end, mixing the leftover rice with a little broth was enough for another meal. Poverty was carved deep into our hard, struggling life, and the one precious thing we had back then was our love. Nadia. I jolted out of the memory and came back to see Sebastian beside me. He looked relaxed, and there was even a hint of a smile in his eyes as he looked at me. "I'm asking you, what do you want to eat?" On instinct, I answered, "Pickled greens." At once, a sharp pain shot through my forehead. The hard corner of the menu thrown by him had struck my face. Blood rushed out immediately, running from the corner of my eye, so much that my eye felt as if it were on fire, my whole field of vision blurring red. I clutched my forehead, staggered to my feet, and stepped back. In the blur, I couldn't see his face clearly. I only heard his calm, cold voice. "Get out. When you're done eating, change your own bandage. Don't leave a scar. Otherwise, other people will think I abuse my staff, and it wouldn't look good if that got around." I wanted to give a bitter laugh, but I didn't even have the strength to lift the corner of my mouth. He really was thorough, down to the last detail. He paid me no more attention and left the room by himself. I lifted my head and looked at the IV drip, which had only a little medicine left in it, and pulled the needle out on my own, not caring about the blood welling from the puncture. Then I crawled over, dragged the food tray close, and the bowl of congee and the small plate of pickled greens beside it. I ate every last bit of it clean. When I came out, I saw Sebastian sitting on the long shag rug in the living room, his back against the sofa, head bowed, plucking at the guitar. The stray notes drifting from his fingers weren't smooth and weren't pleasant to hear. To me, the sound was like a stagnant, dead pond. Before we broke up, he used to spend day and night writing music because, at long last, a company had agreed to sign him, promising to release his second album, and even to let him perform the theme song for a film. We had once sat under the moonlight out in an empty stretch of land, and he'd played his favorite passages for me and asked whether I thought they were good. I clapped and said, "They're really, really good," and told him that someday, when he was famous, everyone would listen to them. But I would always be the first. He curved his lips into a smile and said nothing more, only bowed his head and played a little more. He'd written 9 songs, and the album could hold 10. He leaned over to kiss me, and my finger accidentally brushed a string, drawing out one long note. "Nadia," he said, "the last song, I'll play it only for you." Thinking of it now, I murmured, almost to myself, "The last song, he'll only play it for me." Then I asked, "The 10th song, have you finished writing it?" "No." He pressed his fingers flat against the strings and looked up at me, the smile on his lips carrying a trace of mockery. "I deleted it. The next song I'll never write again." After the biggest film of the year finished shooting, aside from helping the crew wrap up some post-production work, Sebastian began preparing for his concert. He had told his fans early on that he was writing a new album and would perform every song from it at this year's show. And yet, I noticed he wasn't all that busy. He even had time to go out often for dinner dates with the actress, Miss Sloane. Online, plenty of people had come out in support of them as a couple. Miss Sloane seemed to be a young lady from a distinguished family. From the moment she debuted, she'd had countless first-rate resources at her fingertips. She played the female lead opposite Sebastian, the top star, in a recent project, and their relationship was developing steadily, as though everything were going exactly according to plan. They'd even gone to look at engagement rings, and someone had managed to snap a photo of it. It seemed all they were waiting for was the right moment to make it official. Sebastian, it appeared, was afraid I might do something, so he made a point of coming to tell me so. "Miss Ramsey, I'm sure you understand perfectly well that with my reputation as it is now, no matter what you say, no one will believe you. So I hope you won't do anything foolish, anything beyond your means." I sat by the window, watching the sunset sink slowly toward the horizon. After a long while, I turned back to look at him and sighed. "What do you think I'd do? Spread it around that you and I were once together? Accuse you of playing 2 women at once? Or expose Miss Sloane as the other woman?" His assistant sat across from me, his eyes carrying one clear message. "You think you have any right?" "I won't do that," I said with a faint smile, no longer looking at either of them, my gaze drifting to the darkness outside the window, where the blazing red of the sky was slowly being swallowed by night. He and I had once been like that too. Not out of a wish for revenge, or to vent or anything of the kind. Whatever roads lay ahead of us in the future, in this moment we were only two straight lines that had crossed for a fleeting instant. I had never once imagined that the me of today and the Sebastian of today would have anything you could call forever. Very late that night, Sebastian came home in a neatly pressed suit, the faint smell of wine hanging about him. I said, "Your assistant came by during the day and left some songs written by professional composers, all of them prepared for your new album and your concert. A big star like you doesn't even write his own songs anymore?" He didn't answer. He just pulled me up from the sofa and hauled me straight into the bathroom, threw me into the tub, water splashing everywhere. He roughly pressed me down. The hot water splashed into my eyes, forcing me to shut them, so that I couldn't clearly see the face of the man before me, brimming with desire. "You and Miss Sloane, you only go out to dinner and never spend the night?" His face held no expression. He gripped my chin and forced my face to the side. "She's pure. She can't be touched. And you? You're only fit to be the place where I let off a little, aren't you? Truly disgusting. Even those cheap, gory novels don't go this far anymore." He seemed to realize he'd said too much. He forcefully turned my face back and stared at me for a few seconds. "You've been drinking?" I lifted a hand, my fingers idly tracing meaningless lines in the air. "Just a little. Those bottles in your cabinet look expensive, but they're not really that good." The rest of my words were swallowed by his kiss. "She and you really aren't the same," he whispered against my lips. "That's why, in the end, I'll marry her." When he'd said it, he stared hard at my face, as if searching for some expression there. But my mind had already drifted away, back into the past. I don't know how many times I'd remembered it. The first time we ever took part in a music festival, we were a small band with a little name, only told at the last minute that we could join. Sebastian rarely showed nerves like that. He prepared with great care, and even 10 minutes before going on stage, he was still practicing one last time. I remember clearly how he shone at that festival, and how a not bad entertainment company took notice of him. Even though the terms they offered weren't good, they were still willing to sit down and talk about signing. Sebastian went into the restroom and didn't come back for a long time. Seeing the company's representative growing more and more impatient, I quickly apologized and ran off to find him. I found him at the end of the restroom corridor. When I got there, he had a drunk man pinned to the ground and was driving his fist into the man's face. The man's head snapped to the side from the blow, and he spat out half a broken tooth along with blood. But his eyes stayed fixed on Sebastian, full of hatred, mixed with the confidence and arrogance of someone with power. In a dark corner nearby, a young girl of about 15 or 16 stood with her face streaked with tears, pale with fear. That night, the police took Sebastian away. After that, my sense of time went hazy. I had to run all over the place, and it cost me a great deal of effort to piece together the fragments of what had happened that night. A young girl who dreamed of becoming a star had been coaxed into drinking by a director. He was already a man of vile habits, and he'd meant to do something to her right there in the restroom. But Sebastian had caught him and stopped him. Do you know who he hit? A famous director, the sixth son of the Langford family. If he isn't sentenced to a few years in prison, that man's career would be over, and our company won't sign him either. I wanted to find that girl to be a witness, but her parents, afraid of trouble, had quickly taken her out of the city. I wanted to visit Sebastian too, at least to know how he was, but I was blocked outside the Iron Gate and couldn't reach him at all. That evening, I stood in the blazing red glow of the sunset, watching birds sweep across the sky, the crowd streaming past me like a river in a hurry, none of them caring what had happened. I think that from then until now, we never truly left that sunset by the riverbank all those years ago. Sebastian's concert went off exactly as planned, a brilliant success. Miss Sloane appeared as a special guest of the show. The relationship between the two of them was still never made public, but the ambiguous signals, running like a strong undercurrent, only drove their fans wilder, pushing harder for them to be together. Both of them seemed to grasp the unspoken game, playing at the ambiguity while keeping everything perfectly under control. After the concert, they left separately for the celebration party. I sat alone in a car, rolled down the window, and reached my hand out to feel the wind. In the cold wind of winter, I narrowed my eyes a little. Suddenly, a hesitant voice reached my ear. Is this Sebastian Wilder's car? It looks like someone's inside. Should we ask, do you think? But wouldn't that be too forward? I slowly opened my eyes and saw 3 young women standing by the roadside greenery. They wore short skirts and high socks and buttoned cardigans, young and pretty, looking toward the car with uncertainty. When they saw me, they froze, then spoke up shyly. Miss, is this Sebastian Wilder's car? I nodded. Yes, it is. At once they lit up with excitement, their hands clenched into little fists, their eyes shining. Then could we get an autograph or see him for just a moment? We're not crazy fans, honestly. We just got lost and happened to pass by, and we never expected to run into his car. Miss, are you... I smiled gently. I'm Mr. Wilder's assistant, but he isn't in the car right now. The 3 of them showed their disappointment plainly, yet they couldn't bring themselves to leave. They stood rooted in place, their eyes full of a small, waiting hope, as if wishing for a miracle. I thought for a moment, then opened the car door and stepped out, meaning to say something to them. But just then, the girl standing at the far end happened to turn her head, and she cried out in a burst of excitement, "Sebastian Wilder!" A gust of night wind carried a thick smell of wine and cigarette smoke, and I couldn't help coughing. I lifted a fist to cover my mouth, turned my head, and saw Sebastian standing only a few steps away. The people beside him were not Miss Sloane, but 2 men I didn't know. One looked pale, his face swollen, dark shadows under his eyes, his whole air gloomy. The other seemed past middle age, his hair streaked with gray. The eyes of all 7 of us happened to meet in the air, and it created a strange, heavy atmosphere. The young girl who had called his name opened her mouth uncertainly, her voice timid. Mr. Wilder, we're all your fans. Sebastian didn't answer. His lips were pressed tight, and I could tell he was tense because his eyes couldn't seem to focus. Mr. Wilder. The gloomy-faced man suddenly broke into a strange smile, then clapped Sebastian on the shoulder, his voice warm in a false sort of way. Looks like some little fans have come looking for you. In that case, we won't disturb you any longer. When he'd said it, he patted Sebastian's shoulder once more, then turned and led the way off. As he passed the 3 girls, he stopped, turned back, and smiled lightly. If you're fans of Mr. Wilder, next time he has a free day, have him treat you all to a meal. Under the moon that flickered bright and dim behind the clouds, I watched the 2 strangers disappear into the distance, while Sebastian stayed behind to sign for the 3 girls. After he'd finished signing, he called me over and told me to add the 3 of them to my contacts. For the recording of my new album coming up, there'll be a small listening session. If you're interested, I'll have my assistant get in touch with you. Sebastian's smile was so beautiful it didn't seem real, and his voice was gentle to the point of being hard to believe. That friendliness left the 3 girls so thrilled they couldn't get a word out, only standing there with flushed faces, nodding again and again. In any case, thank you for always supporting me. On the way home, Sebastian was quiet in a way that was rare for him. He didn't throw out his usual mockery at me. It wasn't until we got home, under the dim light of the hallway, that I suddenly asked, "Where's Miss Sloane? The two of you went on a private date?" As if being yanked back into reality, he abruptly reached out, pulled me close, and pressed my whole body against the wall. "Why do you care about my fiancé? Or are you jealous? Do you want me to marry her, Nadia?" We were so close that the strong smell of wine on him was even sharper. I realized he truly had a great deal to drink. In the blink of an eye, Sebastian bent down and kissed me. This kiss was not like the ones before, full of pain and blood. This time it carried a trace of tenderness, even a kind of clumsiness, as though he were feeling out my emotions. His hand stroked softly over my hair, his voice gentle. "Why are you asking these things?" I sighed without a sound. "I don't want to know. Is that all right?" He gave a low laugh. "Of course it isn't. But you can beg me. Beg me to keep this relationship with you even after I'm married. She won't mind." "Sebastian, do you regret it?" He laughed as if he'd heard the most ridiculous story in the world. "Regret? The one who ought to regret it is probably you, Nadia. If you hadn't left me back then, do I regret it? That day at the river, when I saved you?" Everything around us suddenly fell into silence. His hot breath, faintly scented with wine, brushed against my neck. In the dim light of the moon slipping through the window, I saw his eyes glint red, red as blood, shining. Were those tears? The silence stretched on, as if every second were being pulled endlessly thin. In that blurred space between memory and reality, I don't know how long passed before I heard him say, his voice low, "But we can only keep going forward, Nadia. We can never, ever turn back." That night, Sebastian came down with a high fever, probably from drinking too much. His body was burning like fire, and his mind was hazy. I could feel his memories turning chaotic. One moment he'd grip my hand so hard it frightened me. The next, he'd mutter something under his breath. He said that when he signed the contract and released his first album, he'd use the money he earned to buy a ring to propose to me. The sapphire ring we saw in that shop window that day. Do you remember? I curved my lips gently. But I didn't even like it. No, you did like it. I saw you look at it for several seconds. He was delirious, his voice unclear. You always look at the things you like just like that. Just like before, every time I walked past your house, you'd sneak looks at me. I didn't answer. In the haze, my memory drifted back many years. When I was small, I'd knelt in the yard of our house, crying and sobbing, crawling forward, while my mother struck my back over and over with a willow branch, cursing me, calling me a debt she'd been born to pay. She said that if I'd been beaten to death that time, she'd never be able to have a son, and my father would have been free to walk out and start a new family in the city. I tried to crawl toward the door, sharp gravel digging into my knees until flesh and blood ran together. Just then, Sebastian happened to pass by. He pulled me up, and the two of us ran together, and behind us came the footsteps of his father, who'd just lost at gambling and been drinking, chasing after him to beat him. The village road back then hadn't been paved yet, and the dust rose in clouds that set us coughing, our vision blurred. Sebastian wore an old shirt his own father, who had abandoned them, had left behind, stained all over with grease, the sleeves worn to fraying. My own dress was no different, ragged and old. At the far end of the village, at the foot of the mountain, there was a ramshackle old house with wind coming through on every side, where a blind, lame old man lived. People said that when he was young, he'd played music, but he never made it, and someone had broken his leg. In his house, there was one old guitar, and it was from that guitar that Sebastian learned to play. Our life back then was poor and full of broken, worn-out things, but we grew up together out of those very scraps. I learned the guitar alongside him, but I had no gift for it at all and played so badly that the blind old man could only shake his head. On the way home, I asked Sebastian, "Can we leave this place?" He wasn't certain. He only said that the blind old man had told him that if we studied really hard, we could test into the county middle school, and if we did even better than that, we could make it to the city. Our village school only went up through junior high, and neither of us was a good student. The teacher once said that if we made it into the county school, we'd struggle to keep up with even the basics. Only Sebastian, with his gift for music, could hold a melody in his head after hearing it a few times and play it back whole. The year I turned 16, two big things happened. That summer, a heavy rain brought a mudslide that collapsed the old house at the foot of the mountain, and the blind old man was buried inside. He'd been buried too deep, and with no relatives or friends willing to help. In the end, no one dug him out. That same year, my father, who had remarried and was living in the town, had an accident at a construction site. On the way to the hospital, while he still had a faint breath left, he told his coworkers that his compensation money should all be left to his son and his new wife, and that my mother wasn't to get a single cent of it. That night, my mother erupted in a rage I'd never seen before. She grabbed a stick studded with thorns, dragged me out of the house, and beat me savagely in the yard under the cold moon. My old dress was caked with mud, the hem flung up to bare a waist gone thin to the bone from hunger. Then, all at once, my mother stopped. She stared at me, and her eyes suddenly turned into a strange kind of hope. She threw the stick away, her face taking on an odd, hard-to-read gentleness, and came to help me up. Her rough, calloused hands, smeared with the blood running from my wounds, patiently smoothed my matted hair, only making everything stickier and more of a mess. "Nadia," she said, "you know the Lee family's daughter at the head of the village? Thanks to her, that family built a 2-story house last year. Now your father's gone and he's left us nothing at all. It all went to his son and that vixen." She paused, her gaze on me so gentle it seemed about to drip. "Now the only one I can depend on is you." Ah, I knew that family. They had 3 daughters. The 2 older ones had been sold off, and the youngest, born a son, had been kept. The 2 older girls worked in a brothel in the county, and apart from what they needed for food, they sent every bit of their earnings home. I clenched my teeth, my whole body shaking, wanting to shake my head, but I hadn't the strength left. The next day my mother went around asking, but as luck would have it, everyone said I was too skinny and no one was interested. She kept asking, and in the end, she changed her plan. She decided she'd sell me for a bride price and then use that money to remarry and move up to the city. She started going to the gambling dens in the village, playing at the tables while she asked around about who would pay the highest bride price. But before long, she'd lost the little money we had left. Then she got to know Sebastian's father. He said he had connections, that in the city there was no shortage of men who liked young girls like me, but since I seemed stubborn, he'd have to train me first. The 2 gamblers agreed on the spot to the plan to sell me. Sebastian's father dragged me along like a dead dog. As we passed the spot where my mother stood, I gathered all my strength and grabbed her by the ankle, calling out, "Mom!" But she only kicked me away in annoyance, stepped on the back of my hand, and walked on. Can't even do one small thing right. Useless. However much money I could get out of raising you, you're not even half as sensible as other people's daughters. Sebastian's father, a cigarette clamped in his mouth, dragged me past the river, and there he came face to face with Sebastian. Every single day, Sebastian had gone to the foot of the mountain to dig, and at last, that very day, he'd unearthed the blind old man's remains and buried them properly. That was our turning point. Everything began that evening on the riverbank, and after that, everything changed completely. Mom, Nadia, I came back to myself with a jolt and looked down to see Sebastian curled up on the bed, his fever so high it had drawn his body tight. He called for his mother, and then he called my name. Nadia, let's stay like this. Let's stay like this forever. I looked down at him for a long, long time, until it felt as though a century had passed. And at last, I slowly bent down and pressed my cold cheek against his burning one, and whispered softly, "All right, we'll never leave each other again." Sebastian's high fever lasted 2 or 3 days before it fully broke. Through it, he drifted in and out, waking several times, but still refusing to go to the hospital. I didn't force him. I only followed the instructions, gave him fever medicine, laid cold packs on him, and kept watch over his temperature. During that time, his assistant came by once. She seemed to want to say something, but she hesitated and swallowed the words, and only left a message. The moment Sebastian woke, he should call her back at once. I agreed. When he'd fully recovered, I passed the message along. Sebastian leaned against the headboard and listened with a cold, indifferent expression, then tilted his head and gave a faint sneer. "No need to call back. I know what she wants. Just tell her everything goes according to the schedule we set. There's no problem." I nodded and went out to relay it, then came back to find him still leaning against the headboard in exactly the same position as when I'd left, not even bothering to turn his head. After recovering, his face was frighteningly pale, and his eyes shimmered a faint dreamy pink, like a flower bloomed to its very peak. So beautiful it startled you. I looked at his cracked lips, handed him a cup of water, and asked, "What's going on?" "Didn't I already tell you the other day? The listening session for the new songs." He sipped, little by little, until he'd emptied the cup, then threw off the blanket and got up. He turned to me. "Do you want to come to the supermarket with me for a few things?" I was a little stunned. Wasn't that the kind of thing he only did with Miss Sloane? Instantly, he raised a hand and slapped me. The slap wasn't hard, but the warning and the humiliation in it were perfectly clear. "Don't say things I don't want to hear," he said. "You and I both know it. Even if I showed you a little weakness because of the fever, even if we both remembered the past, everything has changed. We can only keep going forward. We can never turn back."
Not far from the house, there was an imported goods supermarket. Sebastian wore a mask and pulled a cap down to cover his face, while I pushed the cart along beside him. As we passed the fruit section, one saw New Zealand apples stacked up in a pile. Suddenly, Sebastian stopped and turned to look at me. In silence, I picked up a box of the apples and was about to put them in the cart, but he spoke up lazily. "They're not actually that good." I turned to look at him. "But if you want to try them, go ahead. Take a box." As if he didn't want to keep talking about it, he tugged his mask up and walked on ahead by himself. I looked at the box of apples for a while, then set it back where it had been. The listening session for the new album was held a few days later. His assistant came to pick us up. When the car was partway there, it suddenly stopped. The door opened, and Miss Sloane got in. I was taken aback. Miss Sloane was coming too? Sebastian's face was cold and tired, and he didn't say a word. Miss Sloane, on the other hand, explained gently, "My brother said there was no point in me just sitting at home. The project at home is at a critical stage right now, and there isn't much I can help with, so I figured I'd rather come out and relax." I pressed my lips together and forced out a dry, The 3 young fans, the pretty ones, rode in a separate car following right behind us. The 2 cars drove on down a long, winding road. At the top of the mountain stood a famous high-end private club. It was said the membership fee ran into 7 figures a year, and the people who came and went there were all wealthy or held high positions in society. The car passed through a stretch of forest and stopped in the parking lot. Sebastian got out first.
I sat in the car and let out a soft sigh. It's only a session to listen to some new songs. Do they really have to make such a production of it, holding it in a place like this? He leaned against the car door, bent to look at me, his voice full of mockery. Are you really this naive, or are you just playing dumb? Get out! The three young fans trailed behind me, looking nervous. They tugged lightly at my sleeve, their eyes full of curiosity as they looked around. I led them into a lavishly decorated room, told them that a staff member would take them to the listening session, and then left. I went down a long corridor where a European-style balcony was tucked away among the flowers and climbing vines, and there I saw Sebastian leaning against the railing, smoking. We were on the very top floor of the building on the mountaintop. From there, you could clearly see the winding road curling down below, and far in the distance, a whole city ablaze with light. They're inside now? I didn't answer, only asked back, Where's Miss Sloane? Her brother has friends here. She went to see them first. Even you two can't get out from under all this. You people are terrifying. I stepped over to stand beside him, rested my hands on the railing, and turned my gaze downward. Do you always stand up somewhere this high to look at everything? He tilted his head and breathed out a mouthful of smoke, his eyes lost somewhere in the haze of it. What are you trying to say? You're not going in? It isn't finished in there yet. I'm in charge of the final cleanup. Sebastian, in these 6 years, how far have you managed to climb? That seemed to anger him. He suddenly turned, seized my wrist, and pressed my whole body against the iron railing. My back slammed into the bar, and the pain was so sharp I couldn't even cry out. I only felt the ember at the tip of the cigarette on his lips touch my skin, hot, and then fall, searing me. He gripped my throat, his voice hoarse. So what? So what if I did? All the girls who showed up today, everything that happened, I've been through all of it. And what about you? You're still standing right here, looking down with me. You left me first. You threw me into hell, and now you want me to feel regret? I have plenty of ways to make you regret it. Plenty of them. Do you have to do this? Do you have to hurt other people? I said. Sebastian, I know you understand. You've long since known the real reason I broke up with you. I left you to save you. Back then, it was the only way. But afterward, you had no chance to turn back. And that was only because you didn't want to turn back. Standing somewhere this high feels good, doesn't it? Even if the ground under your feet is piled with the bodies of so many people. The hand gripping my wrist suddenly began to tremble violently. And then it let go. I forced myself upright, pushing through the pain that seemed to stretch on without end, and listened to the noise rising up from the long corridor far away. Sebastian frowned slightly. I reached out to stop him and said softly, Don't go inside. It's all about to be over anyway. You can't get away either. We're all the same, every one of us. He looked at me, and in his eyes, deep as still water, the flickering red and blue of police lights from far off were reflected. Then, all at once, he came to himself. He stared at me, his eyes blazing up with fury. You betrayed me, Nadia. You sold me out. I gave a small shake of my head. My brother only wanted to bring you back. You climbed high, you went far. But in the end, it all led you to a place where the sky and the sea overturned long, long ago. The place that is truly hell. How many girls have you destroyed? They all loved you. They trusted you. And they followed you without a moment's hesitation. And then you pushed them, one by one with your own hands, onto a road of no hope. As the words came out of me, the tears fell from my eyes. You shouldn't have become like this. This world shouldn't have become like this. A very long time ago, we stood down on the ground and looked up at the high places, feeling every inch of the distance was too far to ever touch. But back then you were Sebastian. You were the one who saved me by the river. You were the one who dug out every last bit of the blind old man's bones to give him a proper burial. You were the one who threw away his own future to save a girl from being hurt. You are not this strange monster in front of me, stained filthy by fame and money. The wail of the police sirens grew clearer. Suddenly he lunged at me. He pinned me against the railing and clamped his hand around my throat. I saw his pale face, the hatred and the love in it so vivid they seemed ready to tear through his skin, and the tears, red as blood, falling from his eyes. Then let's go down to hell together, Nadia. The feeling of suffocation flooded over me. Everything before my eyes narrowed to flickering specks of white, and every sound came as if echoing from somewhere far away, heavy and vague, even the crack of the gunshot. Hot blood splashed out like ink knocked over, spattering onto my face. The force choking my throat abruptly let go. I coughed and struggled to straighten up from my place against the railing. Little by little, my vision cleared. I saw police running toward us down the far corridor, and in front of me, Sebastian's body was slowly sliding down. He wasn't dead yet. His eyes were hazy, unfocused, but I knew that gaze was still resting on my face. His lips parted, but instead of words, only a foam of blood came out. The police reached me. "Miss Ramsey, are you all right?" I slowly shook my head. My eyes lowered to Sebastian lying on the floor, his blood spreading until it reached the corner of my lip. On reflex, I licked my cracked lips, and the tip of my tongue met the bitter, salty taste of blood and the faint scent of gun smoke hanging in the air. That night, on the mountaintop, at that high-end club, the police sirens rang out through the whole night. After that, a long crackdown began, with Sebastian's death on the spot as its starting point. I stayed on in his house another 7 months. During those 7 months, whenever I had no reason to go out, I spent my time exploring every corner of that absurdly lavish house. And in the end, in a corner of the cabinet where the guitars were displayed, I found an old worn guitar he had never once touched. Not only because it was a cheap old thing, no longer suited to his status, but because inside its hollow body was hidden a small portable hard drive. On it was stored all the evidence of his crimes and of everyone who had been his accomplice over those 6 years, the people who had trusted him, who had adored him, or the ambitious young artists desperate to be famous, every young man and young woman, beautiful, whom he had taken to his bed and tormented until they died. All the proof of those crimes had been kept on that drive. The truth is, Sebastian himself had once gone through the same sort of thing before he ever set foot in the industry. When it came down to it, he was very handsome. And in that world, no one turns that away. You could say it was his ticket in, and colluding with the other filthy men was the way to build shared interests. The officer in charge of the case explained it to me in detail. They were involved not only in personal crimes, but in economic crimes, in smuggling contraband, and in the massive embezzlement of public funds. The whole thing implicated too many people, across too many different levels, that without clear evidence it would have been very hard to bring down the entire network. The 3 young girls and Miss Sloane are all safe now, unharmed. Please don't worry. Miss Ramsey, thank you for the great contribution you've made to our work. I said nothing. I only held the cup of hot water in my hands and let my mind drift along with the thin white steam rising from it. Outside the interrogation room, a cold white light spread everywhere, and the police moved busily back and forth. It was just like a very long time ago, when I too had once sat somewhere like this, not knowing how I could manage to see Sebastian one last time. Then I left the room, and a man approached me. He handed me a business card, said he was from a different entertainment company, and told me he could help save Sebastian, could even sign him and turn him into a famous star. The only condition was that I had to leave him. The sixth son of the Langford family, everyone said at the time, was the only person who could make the trouble go away, and even our boss had said it would be a small matter for a man like him. But he'll only lift a finger because he sees that Sebastian has potential, the man went on. The condition before anything else is that you never appear at his side again. If he's going to be famous, he can't have a weakness. The day I walked away from the river, both he and I already knew that only by giving everything we had could we, step by step, make our lives better. The truth is, we had never once had the right to choose. I looked at the blazing red of the sunset and said slowly, "All right." After that day, Sebastian and I truly went our separate ways. He stepped, one pace at a time, into a place of fame from which there was no turning back, while I stayed lost, wandering in a hazy, ordinary world. When I was small, my teacher said I had no special talent for anything. Later, the blind old man said my playing was only ordinary too. I am an ordinary person, and my life is an ordinary one, just like the thousands upon thousands of people out there in the world who are the same as me. Sebastian and I only walked one short stretch of road together, and now, in the end, we had both returned to our own separate paths. I thought we would never meet again. I never expected that 6 years later, when he had become famous everywhere, standing in a place I could never once have imagined, 3 strange girls would come looking for me. They told me that their older sister, the one who had paid for their schooling, had gone missing. Later, her body was found by the river, the bones swollen and white from having soaked in the water too long, almost impossible to recognize. The forensic report concluded that her body was covered in wounds, with signs that she'd been assaulted. Crying, they told me so many things. They said their sister had loved her idol Sebastian, and that before she disappeared, she'd said she had been chosen as a lucky fan to have dinner with him. They had reported it to the police, but because the case touched on so many parties, the police needed more evidence. It took a very long time before they finally found a video, secretly filmed years earlier, back when Sebastian and I were still singing on the street. In that shaky, blurry footage, I saw him set down the guitar and take firm hold of my hand. "Miss Ramsey, we need your help." I was stunned, unable to say a word. Back then, I was doing a humble job, my pay barely enough to keep myself alive, struggling along in this ordinary world, while Sebastian was now a dazzling star, high up in the sky. I saw him in the trending news, in films, in other people's conversations, but I had never once told anyone that I knew him. Now I stared and stared until my vision slowly blurred. I had almost forgotten that there had once been a time when we loved each other. He shouldn't be like this. I wiped my tears and looked up at the police, and even, clumsily, made a few gestures with my hands. "You've investigated all of it. You must know, don't you? Before, he was once locked up simply because he wanted to protect a young girl, because he beat a man badly enough to make an enemy of him." The officer sighed. "Miss Ramsey, we understand your concern. But people change. Fame blinds the eyes. Power corrupts the heart." Those words were like a sharp arrow pinning me to the ground. The pain seemed to curl my tongue up inside my mouth, and it was a long time before I could speak. But maybe he hates me. If he really has changed into what he is now, the person he hates most is probably me, for using such an extreme excuse to leave him. And yet, I still agreed to help them, because I had once abandoned Sebastian, and now I had to pull him back. After we met again, I realized the police hadn't been wrong. Sebastian was extremely wary and careful. He had a house so lavish it was absurd, and he didn't even hire help. Even his assistant wasn't free to come and go as she pleased. His caution and his reason existed everywhere else. But in front of me they all crumbled to dust, because we had walked such a long road together. He hated me to the very depths of him, and yet that hatred had grown out of love, a love that tangled together and turned into warped, thorny brambles. Those brambles wound tight around him, and the higher he climbed, the tighter they pulled, their sharp thorns sinking deep into his blood. And so he wanted to give that pain back to me many times over. That night, he still lay asleep, feverish and delirious. I changed the cloth on his forehead, which had gone warm, and sat beside the bed and said softly, "But I don't blame you, because all of this began with me. I just don't want you to keep on like this anymore. It's time to turn back. It's time now to turn back." I stood up and left the room, and I sent off the evidence I had copied from the hard drive, together with the plan that was now nearly complete. When I came back in, he was still fast asleep, murmuring my name, one syllable at a time. I had said that we would never be apart again, but that was only a lie. Thank you all for listening.